Hello, friends, and a special shout out to McGeeb. I'm going to be going over what for me, is the best settings to achieve the highest frame rates while minimizing screen tearing, while minimizing frame time latencies and game spikes in Fortnite. I've spent months and months and months going through all the settings, trying everything. And for me, this is what I find to be optimal. Now, this not necessarily is going to be for everyone. I'm old. I have bad eyesight, so for me, this works good for me. If you're a young little whippersnapper at 18, you got good vision, your brain's working at full speed, then you're probably just going to want to go unlimited FPS performance mode so that you get the highest amount of frame rates. But for me, there's some disadvantages of performance mode. And the biggest one for me is there's no anti-aliasing. So in order for this all to make sense, I don't want to just tell you what settings to set. I kind of want to explain it so you have a better understanding in case you want to start tweaking things. So I'm going to go over the basics in case you have never heard any of these terms or understand what FPS is, frame time, frame sync, and those sort of things. So, um, when you buy a monitor, you buy it at a certain refresh rate, usually in megahertz. My monitor is 144 refresh rate megahertz. There's a 160, 240, 360, 480, 560, right? And the thing is, the higher the refresh rate, the more competitive you can be because you're seeing more frames per second. You're getting more information, right? It also, the more frames that you can draw per second, the lower your input latency is. So what input latency is when you click your mouse to fire at somebody, the amount of time it takes in milliseconds for your click to register into the game and vice versa up to the servers and back, that is called latency. Now, the lower your input latency is, the more accurate you're going to be potentially if you have good aim and you can see things well. Um, you click, it fires. If you can do that faster than somebody else, then you're going to have a competitive advantage, right? Um, and frame rate really affects that a lot. Um, but there's something else that most other people don't understand is you got to be able to see clearly the target that you're aiming at. So it's not just how your input latency is not the end all and be all. You got to be able to see clearly the enemy maybe far away. And that's where I focus on because with my bad eyesight, I need to be able to see people clearly. So what a lot of people do is they set Fortnite and or other games to be uncapped FPS, go as high as your game can set, and um, set your graphic settings to be as low as possible, and you'll get the highest FPS, you get the lowest input latency. Great. But are you able to see the character clearly as they're moving? So one of the other advantages of a high frame rate is less motion blur. The more times things are drawing on your screen, the more clear they are, um, and you're able to distinguish the enemy. You'll be able to put your crosshair on them, fire, and eliminate them, right? So motion clarity is greatly affected by high FPS. But that's not the only thing that affects motion clarity. Anti-aliasing drastically affects motion clarity and the ability to see edges in a game, especially in first-person shooters, right? So edge detection, your eyes work by seeing contrast, differences in contrast, and be able to see edges of characters where they stop and start. That's how you know what's inside the character, and you got to fight. So in performance mode in Fortnite, um, there's no anti-aliasing, so things are very jagged, and for me, hard to see, hard to clearly see. The second thing is, um, in terms of motion clarity, is If you have a very high FPS and you're going above what your monitor is, let's say that my monitor is 144 hertz, but my frame rate is 200. What's going to happen is two very bad things. One is called frame sync interruptions, lag, delay, spikes. There's not really a term for it, but your frame time is your video card, your GPU working with your CPU to deliver frames in a sequence in order that your monitor can keep up with so that everything is clear and smooth. If that gets out of whack or the timing is off, that's where you start seeing stuttering in your games. And stuttering, as you know, can get you killed, right? In an FPS game, um, causes a lot of problems. So we want to set our video settings both in Windows and the game to minimize the frame time sync issues while getting as high FPS as we can to achieve the best clarity. But we really want to have some form of anti-aliasing to smooth the edges so things are not blocky, pixelated, and we can distinguish the character. So uh, that's kind of the introduction of FPS, frames per second, how many frames are drawn to your screen. Your screen refresh rate is how fast your monitor can draw those. And the goal is, and here's the key, you do not want to go over your refresh rate of your monitor. So let's say my monitor is 144 hertz. You do not want to go over 144 hertz, otherwise you will get screen tearing, where top portion of your monitor is not in sync with the next line and things start getting torn. That greatly affects your motion clarity to be able to distinguish enemy characters, to be able to correctly focus on them and aim. Right, so we don't want screen tearing. If you go over your monitor's refresh rate, you're going to get screen tearing, and that's a problem. Then the other problem is if your refresh rate of your card is way lower than your monitor's refresh rates, let's say 60 or below, you're not getting the best input latency. So you're not performing at the best that your system can perform. So again, the goal is to have the highest refresh rate of the game, but just below the refresh rate of your monitor so we don't get screen tearing, and we want anti-aliasing. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I set my settings to achieve that, to get the best clarity, best motion clarity, best contrast, the least amount of frame tearing, and the least amount of frame time sync issues, so that for me at least, it's as optimal as possible. If you just set your frame rate to be uncapped and you're going over your monitor's refresh rate, you're going to get frame time spikes. You're going to get frame tearing. In my opinion, that's a bad experience. Okay, so how do you find out what your refresh rate of your monitor is? Well, you can just right click on your desktop, you go to display settings, and you click on your particular monitor, and you go to advanced display settings, and here's the refresh rate. So for me, it's 143, 144 essentially, 143.97. Okay. Now you also notice, and what I'm going to talk about after all this is, let's say that your monitor is 1440p, which is my monitor, but you want even more clarity, then I'm going to show you how to upscale your resolution to 4K, which again will give you better anti-aliasing, will give you better edge contrast ratios and detection, so that you can have the clearest video to be able to again distinguish the edges of characters as they're moving, and as there's movement, the most amount of clarity. Okay, so our refresh rate's 144 hertz, and in order to cap your frame rate below your monitor's refresh rate, it's recommended to be at a minimum of 4 frames lower than your refresh rate. So if I'm 144, um, you want to drop it down to 140, or you can go even more. So I typically do 138 FPS, which means my video card will never send more frames to my monitor than my monitor can handle. That greatly reduces frame time latency issues. It completely eliminates screen tearing and really gives me the best um, performance and clarity um, in Fortnite. Okay, so we got a refresh rate. We're at 144 hertz. Now, there's a debate online whether or not capping your frame rate in Windows or in game is better. And the theory is if you cap your frame rate in game, that has less of an effect on your input latency than capping it in Windows. And while that's true, the problem with Fortnite is after every update, it resets the settings in the config file um, to erase your settings so that if you try to cap it manually in game, you got to keep updating it. So if you wanted to look where that is, if you go to your user profile settings, you go to app data, you go to local, you go to Fortnite game saved, you go to config, Windows client, game user settings. If you open that up and you just search for frame, you'll see frame rate limit. So right now it's 144. You could change this to 138, save it, try to make it read only, but the next time Fortnite updates, it's going to reset that back. So I don't recommend having to do that within Fortnite. Again, you'll notice that I'm on 4K. I have a 4090, and I have a slightly older Intel 1080 850K processor. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Um, so I don't recommend doing it in the config file because in Fortnite, it only has like 60, 120, 144, 240. It only has the high typical values rounded out. You don't have the custom ability to set your frame rate to 140, 138. Other games you can, just not Fortnite. So we have to use another program to allow us to cap our frame rate just below our monitor's max refresh rate. And the best program to use is called Riva. Was it Riva Tuning Server Statistics Server? Something like that. Otherwise known as RTSS. So Riva Tuner Statistics Server. So what you want to do is you want to go onto the internet, you want to download MSI Afterburner. Okay. And when you install MSI Afterburner, you want to make sure you check the box to install the Riva, can't even remember, Riva Tuner Statistics Server. Okay. And this may be small to see. Sorry, because I'm at 4K and this doesn't scale well with 4K. But anyway, what you want to do is you want to set it to start in Windows, and then where it says frame rate limit, you want to go 4 or more below. I'm doing 6 FPS below your monitor refresh. So if you have 160, you want to go like to 156 or whatever, right? 4 or more, 6 is where I like. And this will cap your frame rate. Your monitor will never go above this limit. And in my opinion, this really doesn't affect input latency to any noticeable level. All right, so that's step one. Download MSI Afterburner. Make sure you check the box to install the Riva Tuner Statistics Server. Come in here, set it to start with Windows. You can also turn on the show on-screen display. I'm going to turn that on so you can see what it does. Set your frame rate limit to 138. Okay, so that's good. And if you close this, this will still all run in the system tray. Oops, I probably shouldn't have just closed it. Maybe minimize it. Usually it starts with Windows and you're good. Okay, so we're good. So in your system tray, you'll see this little airplane dude, jet fighter, and then this little icon down here at the bottom for Riva Tuner Statistics Server. Now, in Nvidia Control Panel, there are lots of videos on the internet. Actually, let me pull up the traditional one here. Regular Nvidia Control Panel. A lot of videos on the internet that talk about, like all these tweaks that tell you how to tweak each and every single one of these settings. Honestly, I recommend don't changing any of these things unless you want to upscale to 4K or higher resolution. So if you're at 1080p, if you want to upscale to 1440p or 4K, because a higher resolution has more better pixel clarity, right? You're going to be able to distinguish edges better. It's going to have a better overall look. So if I was to run native at my monitor's refresh monitor's resolution at 1440p, um, it's fine. But if I want more clarity, then I'm upscaling with DSR. I will talk about this after the fact. But needless to say, uh, I don't recommend changing anything in here really. One thing we didn't talk about is G-Sync and FreeSync. So in order to reduce tearing as well, what is built into monitors is a technology to sync your monitor to your monitor's refresh rate to your video card's FPS, right? So let's say that you're playing a game and you're averaging 120 FPS in the game. Even though your monitor is 160 hertz, for example, your monitor should match and come down to 120 to match your FPS, and that will give you the best um, visual environment on your screen. There's no tearing, and that's what G-Sync does, and FreeSync. So some monitors are G-Sync compatible. Some are FreeSync, which is AMD. So I have again a 40 GeForce RTX 4090, and my monitor is G-Sync compatible. So you want to make sure that your G-Sync is turned on, and then there's actually a G-Sync settings in here. So you do want to make sure that your G-Sync is enabled, full screen, and my monitor is an LG. So it's important that you have G-Sync on because you want G-Sync and you want your frame cap, and that will greatly help you with screen tearing issues and stuttering. Okay, so just to recap, we did MSI Afterburner with RTSS. We set a frame cap 4 or 6 below your monitor's refresh rate. We went into Nvidia control panel and made sure that that G-Sync is working fine. So now I'm going to go into Fortnite. So as I mentioned earlier, if you're a young little whippersnapper, you're going to get potentially better input latencies. The lower the millisecond, the better, right? And in order to get those high frame rates in Fortnite is really, in my opinion, not optimal. There's other games that have way higher FPS than Fortnite, more competitive shooters. Fortnite is okay, I guess, but Valorant and others are getting like 300 FPS. Counter Strike to 500 FPS, right? Fortnite's engine just can't, the way it's designed, just can't do those super high FPS. But so, as I mentioned, it just doesn't, there's no anti-aliasing. So for me, things look jagged, they look terrible. I really want to have anti-aliasing. In order to do that, you have to be in DirectX mode. So Fortnite supports either DX11 or DX12, and I highly recommend DX12 because DX12 is way more optimized once everything caches than DX11. You're going to get higher frame rates. You're going to get better frame time with DX12, but you have to allow the game to cache all the shaders and everything in the background, um, and it's still not going to be perfect. Um, but I recommend DX12. But in order to have it function at a good speed, you need to enable something called dlss. So we're going to go into the settings here for video, and we're going to kind of go through the video settings, what I recommend. Okay, so for streamers, you kind of have to have windowed full screen in order to be able to alt tab out cleaner and easier. However, you're going to get a lower input latency. There's lots of videos on the internet if you're full screen. So I recommend full screen. I'm running 4K because I want the best pixel clarity because of my bad eyesight. Again, 1440p or where the native resolution of your monitor is fine. VSync, you always want VSync off. VSync is the older original way that monitors would try and sync with. The monitors wouldn't do it. The computer was just saying, "Oh, we've detected that your monitor is 144 hertz, so we're going to pause everything and not sure make sure we don't go over 144." But this creates a massive amount of input latency and input lag. So it's always recommended to turn VSync off. There are videos out there that will say you can run VSync with G-Sync if you frame cap. And while that's true, in Fortnite for me, I have found turning VSync on, which again, its main goal is to reduce tearing, uh, does I can physically see a negative impact. Now, you don't need VSync if you're limiting your frame rate. Um, but again, the frame rate limit, you can see it's just whole numbers. It's not, you don't have the ability to custom specify, which is a real bummer. Hopefully Epic can fix that at some point. So even though I've set this to 144, you'll notice my frame rate is actually 138. And that's because of the RTSS, Riva Tuner server, statistics server, whatever you call it, RTSS, is limiting the frame rate. Now this graph down here um, this visually shows you your frame time. And when you have spikes in here in this graph, that's when your game is literally feels like it's locking up and you're having stuttering. There's nothing, I equally hate stuttering as I hate screen tearing, as I hate uh, aliasing, right? All of that is bad to me personally. Other people can care less. Be like, I don't care about anti-aliasing. I have great eyesight. God bless you, love you. For me, I don't want any screen tearing. I want the best anti-aliasing. I want the best visual clarity, and I want the smoothest frame time like a baby's butt. So, I'm sorry. Anyway, okay. So capping your frame rate using RTSS will give you that. For resolution, I'm running 4K. You don't have to, but I'll show you how to get 4K on a 1440p monitor at the very end of this video here. Okay, so I like running high brightness. Again, bad eyesight, got to see what I'm doing. So, anti-aliasing super resolution. I went back and forth a bajillion times between Nvidia's DLSS and AMD's TSR. And AMD's TSR, in my opinion, looks better and has a higher FPS than DLSS. That's not the case for all games. Some other games, let's say Red Dead Redemption 2, I love playing, um, DLSS looks way better and it has higher FPS. So it's depending on what version the game engine is using of TSR and DLSS. Every so often, they release new versions that have improvements. But anyway, I recommend TSR Epic. I've never actually been able to figure out really the difference between low, medium, high, and epic. Um, I know because DLSS doesn't have this particular uh, settings. Is it using more of your CPU for processing? I really don't know. Anyway, I set to epic because to me looks the best. The temporal super resolution. So what TSR and DLSS does is, let's say that your monitor is at 1440p resolution. What TSR does is it renders the game at a lower resolution internally. So the game's actually rendering at 1080p. It's doing its AI, whatever it does, to fix the image, enhance the image, and then it then renders on your screen at its original resolution, so 1440p. So internally, it's the game actually thinks it's at 1080p, so which is a lot. You get a lot higher FPS. The higher the resolution that your game is rendering at, the slower and lower the FPS is going to be. So if the game thinks, "Oh, good, I'm rendering at 1080p, I can give you 200 FPS," whereas if I was at 144, um, then I'm only going to be able to give you 120, right? So this increases your FPS while looking the same or better. If you're in performance mode, these settings wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have any anti-aliasing, right? Because again, when you are seeing characters on a screen, if the edges of those characters or buildings is more jagged, the human eye cannot distinguish as well as if it looks straight. For me, who has bad eyesight, okay? um, so the clearer that it looks with anti-aliasing, for me, I strongly prefer that. It helps me perform better in Fortnite if things are anti-aliased better. Now, your higher FPS will have better motion clarity for your monitor. So if you have a 240 hertz monitor, things are going to look clear at a higher FPS, or 480 even, things are going to look even more clear. You're not going to have as much ghosting, blurring of what you actually see on the screen. But your computer, your CPU and GPU have to be able to produce those high resolutions. So what TSR and DLSS does is it allows your computer to produce those higher FPS, which overall gives you better anti-aliasing and a higher FPS. Win-win. Okay. Um, but when you're running in DirectX 12 mode, there's a lot more settings that you can have access to make things look super pretty. Oh, so cute. But they kill your FPS. They drastically lower your FPS. So if you come to video settings and you come all the way down to the bottom and you turn on show FPS, you may only be getting 60 FPS if you're like, oh, I'm just going to auto set quality, let Fortnite look at my computer and say, oh, you're awesome computer. Let's just max you out, make you look all pretty. But then you're only getting 60 FPS. You're going to be at not only a visual um, impairment because again, the higher the FPS, the better the motion clarity is, but your input latency is also going to suffer your reaction times because again, the higher FPS has lower input latency, lower input lag. You're going to be able to click fire faster than somebody else. So for me, shadows absolutely destroys your FPS. Not only that, when you have shadows on, if someone's in a shadow, you can't see them as well. So not only is it a tactical disadvantage, it's also a major FPS disadvantage. So I would highly recommend turning shadows off. Now, so for global elimination, for me on my 4090, it just doesn't have too big of a impact on FPS. But remember, the goal is, let's say that you have 160 hertz refresh rate monitor, you want to be around 156 or whatever, right? You're depending on what CPU you have, depending on what GPU you have, you may have to lower these settings to be able to try and match that your highest FPS as much as possible. It's a balancing act that you can personally take however you like. So for me on my 4090, I like the lighting at high. Um, View distance, I like to be epic. This really doesn't affect your FPS too much. Textures don't affect your FPS too much. Effects and post-processing do affect your FPS. So for me, I like medium because I like the effects. But let's say that if ever in the future I get a 240 hertz OLED, wife, please, thank you, Lord, um, then I would probably have to drop these lower, drop this lower to get as high as I can. You don't ever want to turn on hardware ray tracing. This should be off. This completely tanks your FPS. And that's pretty much it. So if we come back and we see our FPS here, what I want to do is I'll drop into the game and we will, let me see if I can just find something here to, just as a test. Okay, so I'm just going to drop in a map solo here and kind of show you what it looks like. Do, 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 do. Right. Now you're going to see frame time spikes. Fortnite is Fortnite. Now, there is another disadvantage of running in DirectX 12 mode, and that is grass. in the old days, I think before chapter 5, maybe chapter 4 or before, um, you were able to go into your INI file, your user settings, and disable drawing grass. So you could actually run in DirectX 12 mode and turn off grass, and that was fantastic. They stopped that ability um, at this point. So if you run in DirectX 12, you're going to have grass. Some people absolutely hate grass, and I don't like grass. It does cause a tactical disadvantage for you, but I'd rather have anti-aliasing. I'd rather have anti-aliasing. I'd rather have motion clarity than so. I guess I need to move this boika. But anyway, you can see my FPS. It's literally locked at 138. And this may not be the best map, really to show you highest FPS, but you can see it's literally locked at 138. No matter how fast I turn, I get no screen tearing, my input lag, and you can see the frame time graph there at the bottom. There's no spikes. It's smooth as a rhinoceros's head. And that's what you want. If there's spikes in there, you're gonna get you're gonna get pauses and hangs and glitches in the game. Which again, if you're in the middle of fighting someone, well, that's the bot. You don't want that at all. All right, let me just hop into the game here. Okay, so hopefully this all makes sense. I know I've been a lot of blabbing. Hopefully you understand FPS, refresh rate, DLSS, FSR, capping your frame rate, frame time, which is the way computers render on a computer is they have one frame in buffers and they go frame. If any of those frames get out of sync and they have to wait for the next frame, or something gets out of order, or whatever reason, I'm not a graphics engineer. So what you'll notice is on DirectX 12, yeah, when you first load into maps, sometimes after, you'll get these little frame spikes. If you're on performance mode and you're switching to DirectX 12, you have to play probably 10 games in order for all the shaders to cache, in order to before you can really judge the fluidity of your frame times. So yeah, play like 6 to 8 times before you judge whether or not your system is. So you can see right now with my video settings on a 4090, which again, yes, it is the best video card currently available, I'm getting locked like 138. Of course, when you jump or whatever, you're gonna get spikies and stuff. But for me, again, I'm playing at 4K on a 4090 with dldsr. I'll go over that here after we're done here. But you'll notice this is very smooth. I'm not getting a lot of lags. Yes, things drop. That's where G-Sync kicks in. But I'm not having any screen tearing. I'm having a very, very smooth frame time. And for me, this gives the best visual clarity, motion clarity, best input lag, and the best visuals in order for me to get killed less quickly. Yeah, I'm not the best. My eyesight's kind of going. I'm just going to try and land somewhere far out so I don't die too quick. Just keep an eye on my FPS frame times, and as you can see, it's running really good. Looks good for me, and for me, this is what I recommend. I don't wanna die today. Okay, so I think you get the picture. You can see that it's so you saw those little spikes there, right? That frame time spike is what you want to avoid, and you're not going to completely get rid of it. The goal is to minimize it as much as possible. Um, but you notice frame times are good. Okay, so let me show you lastly how to upscale from 1080p or 1440p to a higher resolution to give you less jaggies, a more sharp um, visual experience. Okay, so you want to go to your Nvidia control panel and you want to go to your 3D settings. And there's this thing that says DSR factor. So you want to go in there and you want to edit that. And you want to you don't want to use legacy. That's the older style, is no bueno. You want to go to DL scaling and you can either set 1.78 or 2.25. Um, Depending on how good your GPU is, you may not be able to run 2.25. It may be horrible FPS hit. You may just be able to do 1.78, or you may not be able to do anything. But you'll notice these are the resolutions: 2560 by 1440, 2080 by 625, and again, my default resolution is 1440p. That's my the normal resolution of my monitor. So 2560 by 1440p. This is jumping it up to 3840 by 2160, essentially 4K. And that's how you get the higher resolutions. And here's the other thing is games that don't support DLSS or FSR, or they do and you just want better visual experience, Cyberpunk, Red Dead Redemption 2, other games. And even if you do want to run Fortnite in performance mode, if you use dldsr, then you will get better you will get actually some anti-aliasing, because anti-aliasing is built into DSR. Um, and the other thing is you have this DSR smoothness. This controls kind of the uh, anti-aliasing essentially. So I just run at 75. I like it higher. I think it defaults to 33. But again, I like mine super sharp to get rid of the jaggies as much as possible. So hopefully this will not melt your brain, but kind of go over what I recommend to have the best input latency, the best visual clarity, the smoothest experience in Fortnite. Um, and yeah, thank you much for watching. Bye.